They wanted my soul for a healing vacation, so I gave them a digital blackout instead. 120 missed calls. 0 balance. My father told me to sacrifice for peace. My mother branded me ungrateful. I, Faye, didn't say a single word. I just became the ghost that pulled the plug on their entire gilded dynasty. But the explosion didn't happen with a mouse click. It began months ago, simmering beneath the suffocating perfection of a home that had already become my prison. It started under the heavy, expectant air of the night the masks finally began to slip. The Harlan mansion shimmered in the golden light of a damp Connecticut evening, resembling a quintessential aristocratic resort. From the edge of the expansive ballroom, I adjusted the silk tablecloths, ensuring perfect symmetry. Each flower arrangement, each chilled bottle of Cristal 1992 in a silver bucket, and each perfectly timed jazz quartet played were products of my invisible hand. I was the solid pillar of this family, the one who kept the walls standing but never seen beneath the fresh paint. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own home, invisible until someone needs a glass refilled or a mess swept away? I watched the guests mingle, their laughter clinking like the expensive ice in their tumblers. Being the youngest didn't make me the baby of the family. It made me the perpetual servant of their expectations. I stood there, a shadow among the light, realizing that my role was to provide the oxygen they breathed while they pretended I wasn't even in the room. An elderly server, Mrs. Gable, stumbled slightly as she navigated the edge of the dance floor with a heavy tray of hors d'oeuvres. I moved instinctively, slipping through the crowd with a grace honed by years of staying out of the way. I took the tray from her shaking hands, offering a small, reassuring smile that didn't reach my tired eyes. "Take 5 minutes by the garden fountain, Mrs. Gable," I whispered. "I've got this." True wealth isn't what you possess, but what you can give without needing a thank you note. I didn't resent the labor. I resented the systematic erasure of my soul. I was the architect of their joy, yet I was the only one not invited to share it. That's where the crack in the foundation began to spread. The jazz music swelled, signaling the main event. My father, Harlan, stood at the mahogany dais, his voice booming with the kind of patriarchal pride that demands the room's absolute surrender. He raised a glass to his 30th anniversary, a milestone of endurance and carefully curated appearances. But within seconds, the spotlight pivoted. It didn't land on my mother, Gwyneth, but on my sister, Dahlia. Harlan announced Dahlia's brave return to the family fold after her very public, very expensive scandal in California. He called her the resilient heartbeat of the Harlan name. My mother joined him, her eyes glistening with practiced tears as she described how hard Dahlia had struggled to find herself. And then there was the footnote, a brief passing mention of me, the dependable little helper who kept the house running so the rest of them could focus on healing. The audience erupted in applause for Dahlia's victimhood. I was relegated to a logistical detail, a piece of furniture that happened to breathe. I stood at the back of the room, my hand gripping a chilled glass of water until my knuckles turned white. My face remained a mask of marble, a stoic shield I had spent 24 years perfecting. From across the crowded room, Dahlia caught my eye. She didn't look at me with gratitude. She winked, a silent, predatory claim of territory that made my skin crawl. Instead of letting the heat of anger consume me, I did what I do best. I performed a mental audit. This party cost exactly $45,000. Every cent had been drawn from a sub-account I optimized last quarter to ensure our dividends remained untouched. The very people mocking my invisibility were breathing through an oxygen mask I provided. They saw a servant. I saw a debt that was becoming increasingly overdue. As the jazz quartet transitioned into a slower tempo, Dahlia found me in the kitchen. She was leaning against the marble island, swirling a glass of wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She didn't ask how I was. She complained that the organic lavender sachets in her guest suite weren't the right shade of purple for her therapeutic sleep. "You're so obsessed with your little Manhattan career, Faye," she said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "It's such a distraction from your family duty. You should be here, helping us heal, not crunching numbers in a tiny apartment." I didn't argue. Argument is the tool of the desperate. I looked her in the eye, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Dahlia. Truly. But remember, Peace is a state of mind, not a color palette. Her eyes flashed with a momentary shock at my bluntness, but before she could retort, our father entered the room. He ignored the tension, dropping a thick, leather-bound folder onto the counter. He didn't ask me to look at it. He told me what was in it. "The healing vacation to the Outer Banks is booked for next week," Harlan said, his tone leaving no room for dissent. "Dahlia needs the ocean air, and the kids need stability. You're coming, Faye. It's non-negotiable. We need to be a unit again." I looked at the folder, then at the demanding, entitled eyes of the man who had authored my existence but never bothered to read the story. He didn't see the storm brewing behind my eyes. He only saw a daughter who had always said yes because she didn't think she had the right to say no. I didn't give him the answer he wanted, nor the answer he expected. I simply placed the file on the counter, right next to the car keys. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the house itself. The once obedient girl was gone, and the calculating woman was finally ready to collect her debts. By the time I reached the familiar gray stretch of the George Washington Bridge, the morning fog had already begun to swallow the Manhattan skyline. I drove in a state of suspended animation, my childhood home in Greenwich fading like a bad dream in the rearview mirror. I sought refuge in my sanctuary, a minimalist apartment overlooking the Hudson where the silence was a luxury I had paid for with every ounce of my sanity. The quiet was the only thing that belonged to me. I sat at my oak desk, the cool morning light reflecting off the glass as I meticulously prepared a high-stakes financial report for my firm. I felt a rare sense of mental clarity, the kind that only comes when you are miles away from people who demand you be someone else. The stillness was broken by the sharp buzz of my intercom. My doorman informed me of a delivery. It was a confirmation of a care package I had sent to Mrs. Higgins, my old college mentor currently in a nursing home. Kindness isn't a transaction. It's the only currency that doesn't devalue when the market crashes. Holding on to that small act of benevolence felt like a tether to the person I used to be before the Harlan name became a weight around my neck. Suddenly, the peace was shattered. A sequence of aggressive texts from my mother, Gwyneth, lit up my screen like a series of warning flares. Before I could even process the guilt-tripping emojis, an email arrived from my father's corporate attorney. Attached was a formal PDF, a notice of intent to terminate lease subsidization. My heart didn't race. It grew cold. I stared at the legal jargon, realizing my independence had been partially tethered by a corporate lease through the family LLC. I had lived under the delusion of freedom while they held the master key. A bridge offered by an enemy is often just a pier leading to deep water. I didn't panic. Instead, I opened my personal bank account and started a mental audit of my private savings. I was being squeezed, and the walls were moving faster than I anticipated. The drive back to Greenwich felt like a funeral procession for my own autonomy. I found Harlan in his library, a cavernous room filled with leather-bound books he likely hadn't opened since the 90s. He sat behind his mahogany desk, sipping a neat scotch at 10 in the morning, looking every bit like a king trying to protect a crumbling border. He didn't look up when I entered. He didn't have to. The power dynamic was already written in the silence. "You're being difficult, Faye," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Dahlia's healing is the family's priority right now. We need you at the Outer Banks. The children need their aunt, and your sister needs the support." I stood my ground, my voice steady. "I have a career, Father. I have obligations that don't involve being a live-in nanny for a woman who refuses to take responsibility for her own life." It was a direct attempt to strip me of my dignity, to force me back into the role of a domestic servant. Before I could respond, the door creaked open. Gwyneth entered, the scent of expensive lilies trailing behind her like a poisonous perfume. She played the good cop, moving toward me with a practiced, sorrowful smile. "Faye, darling, we aren't punishing you," she whispered, reaching out to stroke my hair. I flinched internally but remained still. "We're just reminding you that family is a circle of mutual support. Without us, where would you go? How would you survive in a city that eats girls like you alive?" I looked into her eyes and saw the lie for what it was. To them, family isn't a circle, it's a pyramid. I was at the bottom, expected to hold up the stones while they enjoyed the view from the top. I realized they weren't worried about my survival. They were worried about their own convenience. "I understand the terms perfectly," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I saw the relief wash over them, a sickening triumph they thought they had earned. As I walked out of the study, I found Dahlia lounging in the hallway, eavesdropping on the victory. She had a smirk on her face that made my blood run cold. "I knew you'd cave, little sis," she mocked, swirling her wine glass. "You're too soft for the real world. You need us. Just make sure the kids' bags are packed by Thursday. I need to be at the spa by noon." I didn't snap. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I stopped and looked her directly in the eyes. "Strength isn't measured by how much noise you make, Dahlia. It's measured by what you can endure while you wait for the right moment." She laughed, a sharp, hollow sound, but I saw a flicker of unease in her expression. By threatening my housing, they had broken the final moral bond I had with them. They thought they had secured my service. They had actually just secured their own downfall. On my way to the kitchen, I saw our nanny, a young woman named Maria, sitting at the small table, her eyes red from crying. My mother had fired her that morning to save costs for the vacation, leaving her with nothing but a week's severance. It was a casual cruelty that summarized the Harlan philosophy. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope of cash, my own personal money I had set aside for an emergency. "Take this, Maria," I said, pressing it into her hands. "Don't look back at this house. Find a place where you are treated as a human, not a tool. You are worth more than they can ever pay you." She looked at me with a mixture of shock and gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Fay. You're the only one who sees us." "I see everything, Maria," I replied. "That's why I'm leaving too." I walked out to my car, the Greenwich estate looming over me like a tomb. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Julian answered on the second ring. "The trap is set, Julian," I said, my voice a cold, sharp blade. "But they don't realize I'm the one holding the cheese. They think they've won because they took my apartment. They don't know I've already started the transfer of the primary offshore accounts. We need to move the timeline up. I want everything ready by midnight on Thursday." "Are you sure about this?" Julian's voice was calm, but I could hear the anxiety. "There's no turning back after this." "I've been going back my whole life," I said, shifting the car into gear. "It's time to go forward." I drove away, watching the reflection of the massive iron gates disappear in my rearview mirror. My father thought he had cornered me, but he had actually just given me the legal justification I needed to walk away forever. They wanted a vacation. I was going to give them an exodus. The gray road ahead felt like a blank slate. I wasn't panicked about where I would sleep or what car I would drive. I was calculating the exact moment the digital servers would sync. I was thinking about the bank's fraud department. I was thinking about the look on Harlan's face when his circle of support turned into a vacuum. For years, I had been the ghost in the machine. Now, I was the one pulling the plug. Have you ever realized that the person who built the prison is also the only one who knows where the cracks in the foundation are? I knew every crack. I knew every secret. And by the time we reached the coast, the Harlan name would be nothing but a memory etched in debt. The road back to Manhattan was a blur of steel and gray light. My mind worked with the cold precision of a diamond-tipped drill, cutting through the layers of sentimentality that had nearly cost me everything. I sought shelter in a sterile, glass-walled conference room high above the Hudson. Spread before me were the documents I had borrowed from my father's desk in Greenwich, buried beneath glossy vacation itineraries of beach houses and boat rentals. The legal jargon was sharp, clinical, and designed to kill. This wasn't just a paper trail. It was a map of my own execution, a petition for adult guardianship, a durable power of attorney. Both drafted, both waiting for a signature they intended to take by force or fraud during our relaxation trip. The documents claimed I was suffering from a profound mental breakdown due to work-related stress. They aimed to place my entire financial portfolio, my voting rights in the firm, and my personal autonomy under Dahlia's care. In the United States, a petition for conservatorship is a heavy hammer. It requires medical evaluations. I saw then that Dahlia hadn't just been whining about lavender sachets. She had been coordinating with a crooked family therapist to provide a biased evaluation while we were isolated at the coast. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about Dahlia owning my very existence under the guise of sisterly protection. Family is supposed to be the lighthouse that guides you home, not the fog that hides the rocks. I felt the sting of the betrayal, a sharp ice pick through the heart, but I refused to let it cloud my eyes. I treated the petition like a balance sheet that simply didn't add up. It was an error I needed to correct. The door opened, and Julian walked in. His presence was a stark contrast to the toxicity of the Harlan name. He didn't offer empty platitudes or fake hugs. He offered a seat and a secure encrypted tablet. Julian had been my only confidant for years, a man who valued the truth over the convenient peace of a lie. He looked at the documents on the table and then back at me, his face a mask of supportive grimness. "It's worse than the guardianship, Faye," he said, his voice low and steady. He tapped the tablet, revealing a series of transactions I had missed. Dahlia had been siphoning money from my personal dividends for months. She wasn't just spending it. She was funding a private investment in a direct competitor to my Manhattan firm. She was trying to bankrupt my future while stealing my present. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a hardware security key, a heavy, black USB drive. "Faye, you built the digital fortress that keeps this family afloat. You are the architect of their wealth. This is the key to every gate in the Harlan family office. You aren't stealing. You are simply reclaiming the keys to your own house." I took the key. It felt heavy, like a physical manifestation of the power I had spent a decade pretending I didn't have. I looked at Julian and spoke softly. "I don't want them to suffer, Julian. I just want them to stop pretending that my life is a gift they are allowed to unwrap whenever they feel bored." He nodded, knowing the weight of my words. I've seen many families tear each other apart for less, but he saw me as the one who kept the lights on while everyone else slept. My grandmother used to tell me that you cannot set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. I finally understood that true kindness requires boundaries, and mine had been crossed for the last time. The drive back to Greenwich that evening was done under a moonless sky. The USB key was a cold weight in my pocket, a silent promise. I found Dahlia in the kitchen when I arrived, casually drinking my imported tea, the tea I had bought with my own salary, and complaining that the beach house chef didn't specialize in detox menus. She looked at me, feigning sympathy. "You look exhausted. This vacation is exactly what you need to relax your mind. Trust us, your parents have taken care of everything. You don't need to worry about anything." I smiled. It was a genuine, sad smile for the sister I once loved, but who had chosen to be a predator instead. "I know you have, Dahlia," I replied, my voice as smooth as silk. "I've finally seen exactly how much effort you've put in." She didn't hear the edge in my voice. She only saw the daughter who always complied. I retired to my childhood bedroom, a space that felt like a museum of a girl who no longer existed. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my laptop. The screen glow illuminated my face in the dark, making me look like a digital oracle. I watched the clock tick toward midnight. This was the precise moment the banking servers performed their daily maintenance, the window where administrative changes could be pushed without triggering immediate alerts. I didn't feel hatred. I felt a profound sense of duty to the truth. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but justice is a gift you give to the world. I prepared my fingers for the commands that would change my family's world by morning. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was the administrator. As the clock hit 11:59 p.m., I inserted the USB key. The system hummed, recognizing its master. I thought my heart was broken, but I realized it had just turned into flint, ready to strike a spark that would burn their gilded cage to the ground. The dining table was a battlefield meticulously disguised as a feast. I took my seat, the weight of the USB key in my pocket feeling like a loaded weapon. My father, Harlan, sat at the head of the table, the dim chandelier light casting long, sharp shadows across his face like a character from a Greek tragedy. The only sound was the rhythmic clink of sterling silver against fine china, a metronome of suffocating expectation. I looked at the extravagant meal, roasted lamb, vintage wine, and saw only the props of a play that was about to be canceled. "Faye," my father began, his voice carrying the practiced weight of a man used to being obeyed. He slid a thick manila folder across the silk tablecloth toward me. "We've discussed this. Your mother and I believe that your recent stress in Manhattan is reaching a breaking point. This guardianship petition is an act of love. It's a way to protect you from your own burnout so this family can heal together at the Outer Banks. He offered me a choice that was no choice at all. Sign the document and keep my subsidized life, or refuse and be stripped bare. I looked down at the folder. It was a legal trap, a way to own my career and my bank account under the guise of paternal concern. My sister, Dahlia, watched me from across the table, her eyes gleaming with the predatory hunger of someone who had finally found a way to steal what she couldn't build herself. I felt a small tug on my sleeve. My youngest nephew, only 6 years old, was looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. He could feel the poison in the air. I reached out, gently ruffling his hair, and leaned down to whisper in his ear. "It's okay, buddy. Growing up is just learning how to keep your own light steady when the wind blows. Don't let their shadows scare you." In that moment, my heart hardened into something indestructible. I looked back at Harlan, my voice a calm, steady stream that didn't waver. I cannot sign away the person I worked so hard to become, Father. I am a grown woman with a successful career. I am not a cost for you to pay to settle Dahlia's debts. I am not your property. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother, Gwyneth, began her mental torture. She didn't yell. She never did. She just wept quietly into a linen napkin. "You're so heartless. After all we've sacrificed for you, a prestigious college degree, your apartment, and you let your sisters suffer because of your ego? You're so ungrateful," Dahlia scoffed, her voice dripping with artificial trauma. "Please, Mom. Faye thinks her career is the center of the universe. She's just playing house in the city while I've faced real-world pain. She doesn't understand what it means to be part of a family." I stood up, my posture perfect, my movements fluid. I didn't raise my voice because I didn't need to. I remembered a truth I'd kept buried. Forgiveness does not mean giving someone a second chance to hurt you. It simply means refusing to carry their poison in your own veins. I realized then that they didn't want a daughter. They wanted a recurring revenue stream they could control. Harlan's face turned a deep, mottled red. "Fine. If you want to be independent, be independent. I'm calling the bank's regional manager tonight. I'll revoke your administrative access to the LLC's accounts by dawn. You'll be locked out of everything, Faye. Every cent, every door." He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own supremacy, that he forgot one crucial detail. In the American financial system, the person who builds the architecture is the one who owns the back doors. I simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. "I understand, Father. I'll go pack my things." I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom, the sound of their voices drifting up from below. They were already laughing, planning their victory, discussing how they would spend the dividends once I was out of the way. I felt a strange, quiet pity for them. They had traded their souls for a sense of control that was about to vanish like mist in a gale. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dark except for the blue glow of my laptop screen. Outside, a summer storm began to brew over the Connecticut coast, the first rumbles of thunder echoing the digital storm I was about to unleash. I inserted the USB key Julian had given me. The hardware felt cold, heavy, and honest. The clock on my desk ticked toward midnight. At exactly 12 a.m., the banking servers began their daily maintenance cycle. I logged into the administrative backend of the Harlan family office. I didn't hack anything. I didn't need to. I simply used the master credentials I had created years ago when I first digitized their estate. With a few surgical keystrokes, I initiated the nuclear option. I flagged every joint credit card held by Harlan, Gwyneth, and Dahlia as compromised, stolen. I moved the primary disbursement accounts of the LLC into a high-security holding escrow, pending a suspected fraud audit. Finally, I revoked Harlan's digital signature authority across all primary accounts. I watched the terminal screen. Access revoked. Account frozen. Disbursements suspended. My face was reflected in the glass, pale and resolute. The greatest power isn't holding a sword over someone's head. It's being the one who controls the very air the enemy breathes. For a decade, I had been the ghost in their machine, the silent engineer of their luxury. Now I was the one pulling the plug. I shut the laptop and walked to the window. I breathed in the scent of ozone and rain, the weight that had been crushing my chest for years, the weight of being the helper, the unseen one, the disposable daughter, was gone. I knew that by sunrise their world of gold would turn into lead. Their phones would become a chorus of desperation, and I would be the only one with the answers they couldn't afford to hear. That was the night the girl who obeyed finally died, and the woman who survived took her first breath of free air. I laid down on the bed, not out of exhaustion, but out of a profound, peaceful certainty. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I didn't destroy their world. I simply stopped holding it up for them. The early morning sun slanted through the blinds of my childhood bedroom, but I was already awake. I didn't feel the usual knot of anxiety in my stomach. Instead, there was only a profound, peaceful certainty. I had spent 24 years as the auxiliary engine of the Harlan family, and at midnight, I had simply unplugged. By the time I walked downstairs, the house was a whirlwind of frantic entitlement. "Faye, why isn't the car packed yet?" Dahlia shrieked from the hallway, tripping over a designer suitcase. "And why is my banking app showing a connection error? I need to pay the deposit for my Obagi facial at the resort." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I walked straight to my car, my own bags already secured in the trunk. I watched them pile into Harlan's oversized SUV, shouting orders at a world they no longer controlled. They were heading toward the coast, toward their healing vacation, completely unaware that the ground had already vanished beneath their feet. 300 miles away, at a luxury highway travel plaza, the first tremor hit. The morning air was crisp, the sky a mocking, brilliant blue. Harlan pulled up to the premium pumps, his mind likely already on the first scotch he'd have at the beach house. He swiped his primary black card for a tank of fuel and $500 worth of upscale snacks for the triplets. The terminal screen didn't process. It flashed a cold, blood-red message. Transaction declined. Harlan scoffed, muttering about faulty technology. He tried his secondary card. Declined. He tried the business account. Declined. Behind them, the line of vacationers grew long, the grumbling of impatient travelers rising like a tide. Inside the shop, Dahlia attempted to pay for her organic travel kit and 3 bottles of imported mineral water. The register emitted a sharp, high-pitched beep. The manager stepped forward, his eyes suspicious. "Sir, your cards are coming back as compromised. I'm going to have to hold these items." The man who once bought a yacht on a whim was suddenly forced to scrape through the ash and loose change in his glove box just to pay for the gas already in his tank. Dahlia stood by the counter, forced to return her luxury snacks under the judgmental, burning gaze of a dozen strangers. The Harlan name, which usually acted as a golden key, had suddenly become a lead weight. Panic began to set in, a frantic, ugly thing that stripped away their Greenwich polish in a matter of seconds. Back in Manhattan, the world was a different color. I sat in a sun-drenched, quiet corner of a boutique art gallery in Chelsea. The air was cool, smelling faintly of old oil paint and fresh espresso. It was the kind of silence that felt like a long-overdue apology. My phone lay face down on the marble table, its vibration creating a persistent rhythmic hum against the stone. The light on the screen flickered incessantly. Dad calling. 12 missed. Mom calling. 24 missed. Dahlia calling. 84 missed. The text messages were a series of increasingly desperate pleas. They began with confused questions. "The card is faulty. Fix it." Then came commands. "Faye, call now. We're stranded." Finally, the venomous words. "Ungrateful brat. You've killed this family. You're dead in our eyes." I followed the stream of messages with cold, objective curiosity, as if I were observing a storm from the safety of a lighthouse. Anger is a wind which blows out the lamp of the mind. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I wasn't being cruel by staying silent. I was simply refusing to be the fire extinguisher for a blaze they had spent years stoking. For 24 years, I was the 911 operator for every self-inflicted Harlan emergency. Today, the station was permanently closed. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. My why was no longer their comfort or the preservation of their fragile family peace. My why was the girl who used to hide in the pantry when the yelling started. It was the woman who had built their entire financial architecture and was finally claiming the title to her own life. I felt a surge of quiet power. a zen-like calm that made the gallery around me feel more real than my own past. I stood before a large, brooding canvas, a lone ship sitting in a calm harbor after a hurricane. I felt a profound, wordless connection to it. I wasn't reveling in their poverty. I was mourning the fact that their love for me was only as deep as their credit limit. It's a bitter pill to swallow when you realize your value to your family is strictly transactional. Have you ever had to walk away from everyone you know just to find the person you were meant to be? A few feet away, a young art student was quietly crying. She was clutching a sketchbook, staring at the exhibition catalog she clearly couldn't afford. I didn't hesitate. I walked to the counter, bought 2 catalogs, and handed one to her. I didn't want a long conversation. I just smiled and whispered, "The world is loud enough, honey. Sometimes you just need a beautiful place to hide." Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine human connection passing between us. It reminded me that my heart hadn't turned to stone. It had simply prioritized those who deserved its warmth. I wasn't a monster. I was a survivor who had finally learned the value of her own resources. I checked my email one last time before dropping the phone into my bag. Julian had sent a secure message. The bank's legal department is asking for a formal statement regarding the fraud flags. They are starting to smell a rat. Harlan is trying to bypass the admin lock, but the protocol is holding. Stay quiet, Faye. Let the silence do the work. The greatest form of communication is sometimes a total absence of words. I put my phone on permanent do not disturb. The humming stopped. The world narrowed down to the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. I left the gallery, stepping out into the vibrant, unforgiving New York sun. I knew the legal war was coming. I knew they would stop calling and start hunting soon. But as I walked toward the subway, I didn't feel like a prey animal. They spent their whole lives thinking I was just background noise in their grandiose performance. Eventually, they realized that without background, there would be no music at all. Only an uncomfortable, jarring silence remained, which they were forced to fill themselves. I didn't destroy their world. I simply stopped supporting it. And as the city swallowed me, I realized I had never felt so much attention in my life. The silence of the city was no longer a sanctuary. It was the quiet before a planned execution. I sat in Julian's private office, the clinical hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. Julian turned his laptop screen toward me, his face grim. Dahlia had gone live on social media. She was a master of the digital stage, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice trembling as she spoke to her thousands of followers. She wasn't just crying. She was narrating a fiction. She accused me, Faye, of financial elder abuse. She claimed I had stolen her children's college funds to fuel a secret addiction I'd hidden for years. It was a venomous counterstrike, designed to burn my reputation before the truth could ever reach the light. Then Julian dropped the second hammer. My father, Harlan, had officially filed a police report in Connecticut. He claimed I had used my administrative access to embezzle $250,000 from the family trust. They weren't just trying to claw back the money. They were trying to destroy my professional license and send me to a prison cell. They wanted to force me into the guardianship they had failed to take by hand. I watched Dahlia's performance, the shaky breaths, the perfectly timed tears, and felt a wave of cold, surgical disgust. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. I didn't scream at the screen. I didn't throw my phone. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a pristine, leather-bound folder of documents I had meticulously maintained for a decade. "They think they are playing checkers," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "But I built the board they are standing on." Julian explained that Harlan's report was sworn falsification, a serious felony in the state of Connecticut. By trying to frame me, they had walked straight into a legal buzzsaw. My family's desperation had made them sloppy. They assumed I would panic. They assumed I would fold under the weight of a police investigation. They never realized that every penny Dahlia spent was a digital footprint I had already mapped. We didn't wait for a knock on the door. Julian and I walked directly into the local NYPD precinct. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the air smelling of burnt coffee and floor wax. I felt the eyes of the officers on me, but I didn't look like a woman on the run. I was the embodiment of calm, my posture radiating an innocence backed by hard, cold data. I sat across from a lead detective and presented the evidence. I showed him the black will, the forged guardianship papers I'd found in Harlan's desk. I provided the audit trail showing Dahlia siphoning money for her secret investments. Finally, I provided the bank's internal logs proving I had acted as a whistleblower to protect the family trust from unauthorized elder exploitation. The detective looked at the pile of evidence, then at me. "Why didn't you just talk to them, Miss Harlan?" "You cannot negotiate with a fire while you are standing in the middle of it," I replied. "You have to step out and turn on the sprinklers." I wasn't attacking them, I was preserving the assets they were too blinded by pride to protect. While Julian handled the technicalities, I noticed a woman in the waiting room. She looked lost, her eyes darting around as she clutched a police report. Her identity had been stolen, and she was clearly drowning in the bureaucracy. I quietly walked over and slipped Julian's card into her hand. "He's the best at finding what's been taken," I whispered. "Tell him Faye sent you." Even in my own hour of reckoning, I refused to let my heart turn into the stone my family claimed it was. An hour later, the dynamic shifted. Harlan and Gwyneth arrived at the precinct, flanked by their own frantic lawyers. They thought they were there to identify a criminal. They expected to see me in handcuffs. Instead, they found me sitting comfortably in the captain's office, sipping a glass of water, while Julian and the lead detective reviewed the final documents. Their faces paled to a ghostly white. Dahlia was notably absent, likely hiding behind a screen, waiting for a victory that was never coming. The detective stepped out and looked Harlan in the eye. "Mr. Harlan, your daughter has provided incontrovertible evidence of document forgery and major tax irregularities linked to your eldest daughter's LLC. If you continue with this false embezzlement report, you will be arrested for filing a false instrument. Do you wish to proceed?" Harlan looked like he had been struck. He turned to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Gwyneth began her usual routine, the fake tears welling up as she reached for my hand. "Faye, darling, we were just so scared. Dahlia told us." I stood up and stepped back, my eyes locking onto my father's. "I didn't want it to end in a police station, Father. But you traded a daughter for a co-conspirator. You were willing to bury me alive just to keep Dahlia's lies afloat." I looked at Gwyneth, her crying now sounding like hollow static. True peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice. And for the first time in 24 years, this family is finally going to be quiet. I walked past them toward the exit, my heels clicking on the linoleum with a sound of absolute finality. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the sound of the detective's voice rising behind me, and the heavy metallic sound of a door closing in the distance, a metaphor for the family cage that had finally been broken. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the Manhattan wind catching my hair. Julian stopped me at the curb. "Faye, wait. Dahlia isn't at the house. She's at your apartment. She's desperate, and she has a key." I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp alertness. They tried to use the law as a leash, but they forgot that the law is a mirror, and they weren't ready to see the monsters they had become. The morning sunlight in my Manhattan apartment no longer felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. It was a warm, golden embrace on a life reclaimed. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up, feeling a stillness in my bones I hadn't known since childhood. Behind me, Julian sat at the kitchen island, the final settlement papers spread across the marble. The legal storm had passed, leaving behind a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. For years, I had navigated the turbulent waters of the Harlan ego, but today, I was the one deciding where the tide went. The restructuring of Mercy was a delicate, surgical process. I had officially dropped the charges of forgery and sworn falsification against Harlan and Gwyneth. In exchange, they had signed their total, irrevocable resignation from the family office. They were out. Permanently. However, I hadn't left them to the wolves. I established a spendthrift trust for them, a legal fortress that provided a comfortable, modest monthly stipend for their living expenses. They would have a roof over their heads and food on their table, but they would have zero access to the principal capital or the credit lines that had fueled their delusions of grandeur. I looked at Julian and tried to explain the weight of the decision. I'm not cutting them off because I hate them, Julian. I'm giving them the only thing they never had, a life within their means. The greatest punishment for an arrogant person is to be forced to live an ordinary life, and I knew that Harlan would feel every dollar of that budget like a lead weight. True power isn't about crushing someone. It's about removing the pedestals they used to look down on you. I made sure the trust included a separate, protected fund for my nephew's education. That money was ironclad, bypassed Dahlia entirely, and was managed by an independent board. The children shouldn't pay for the sins of the mother, I said, signing the document with a hand that didn't tremble. It was an act of love disguised as a legal maneuver, a way to ensure that the cycle of entitlement ended with this generation. I felt a profound sense of relief, the kind that only comes when justice is tempered with a bit of grace. The final threshold came on Saturday afternoon. Harlan and Gwyneth arrived at my apartment one last time to pick up the few personal effects I had retrieved from the Greenwich estate. They were no longer the untouchable titans of Connecticut. They looked like two people who had finally realized the staggering cost of their family peace. Dahlia was nowhere to be found. Without the Harlan ATM to fund her aesthetic, she had been forced to take a retail job at a high-end boutique she used to frequent as a customer. The irony was a silent, biting symphony. Gwyneth tried to apologize as she packed a box of old photographs. Her voice was small, lacking the manipulative vibrato of the past. Faye, we never meant for it to go this far. We just wanted things to be easy again. I raised my hand gently, stopping the rehearsed grief before it could take root. Don't apologize for the past, Mother. Just respect the future. I don't hold a grudge, but I also don't hold a seat for you at my table anymore. Forgiveness is a door you close so you can stop looking at what's behind you. I wasn't angry, I was simply finished. I realized then that my presence in their lives had been a privilege they had forfeited, not a right they were born with. Harlan looked at me with a mix of fear and a newfound, begrudging respect. He saw the woman I had become, the one who built the architecture and then had the courage to burn the blueprints. You told me I should sacrifice for the family, I told him, my voice reflecting the calm of the river outside. I did. I sacrificed the girl who was afraid of you so the woman who can stand her ground could live. That was the only sacrifice that ever mattered. It was the ultimate mic drop of a decade-long struggle. I handed them the keys to a smaller, modest condo I had arranged for them. The Greenwich estate was being sold to settle Dahlia's debts and fund their new reality. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. As they walked out the door, the weight of their expectations finally left the room with them. I stood in the center of my apartment, alone and entirely whole. As the sun began to set over the Manhattan skyline, Julian and I walked through a small community garden in the East Village, a project I had helped fund with a portion of the reclaimed Harlan Trust. The city noise was a distant, rhythmic hum, no longer a threat but a background score to my freedom. I sat on a bench, breathing in the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I reflected on the journey from that humid Saturday in Greenwich to this cool evening in New York. I didn't win by taking everything from them. I won by taking back Faye. I had my career, my home, and most importantly, my name. True power isn't the ability to control others. It's the absolute, unwavering refusal to be controlled by them. Have you ever realized that the silence you once feared is actually the sound of your own strength? Julian asked if I was ready for dinner, his voice a steady anchor in my new world. I smiled, the first real, unburdened smile in years. I'm ready for everything, Julian. For the first time, the silence doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like a beginning. We walked over to a small sapling we had just planted, a symbol of growth that didn't require anyone else's permission to reach for the sun. I remembered the painting of the ship in the harbor from the gallery. I wasn't that ship anymore, waiting for the storm to pass. I was the sea itself, vast, deep, and moving to my own internal tide. Peace is not the absence of the storm, but the calm within the center of it. I had found my center, and it was made of iron and grace. Before we left the park, I turned off my phone and handed it to Julian. Keep this for the night. I want to hear the sound of the world, not the sound of a notification. I didn't need to check the missed calls. I didn't need to see the latest drama. I just wanted to be present in a life that was finally mine.